The black sedan pulled through the winding hills of Palo Alto as the California sun dipped toward the horizon. Marcus Chen loosened his tie and rolled down the window, breathing in the familiar scent of eucalyptus trees that lined his neighborhood. After 7 grueling days of board meetings in Tokyo, all he wanted was to hold his daughter Emma and collapse into his own bed. The iron gates of his estate came into view, towering and elegant against the backdrop of his sprawling mansion. Marcus smiled, remembering the day he'd bought this place 5 years ago. Emma had been 11 then, spinning in circles on the marble foyer while declaring it looked like a palace. Now she was away at boarding school, but she'd be home for summer break in just 2 weeks. As the sedan approached the security booth, Marcus expected to see Tommy Martinez, the cheerful guard who always waved him through with a warm smile and asked about Emma's latest achievements. Instead, 2 unfamiliar men in crisp black uniforms stepped out, their faces stern and unwelcoming. The driver slowed to a stop as one of the guards approached. Marcus rolled down his window further, assuming they were new hires who simply needed to verify his identity. The guard was tall and broad-shouldered, with cold gray eyes that swept over Marcus with obvious suspicion. "Sir, this is private property," the guard said curtly. "State your business." Marcus blinked, momentarily confused. "I live here," he replied with a slight chuckle. "I'm Marcus Chen." The guard's expression didn't soften. He exchanged a meaningful look with his partner, who had positioned himself near the front of the vehicle. "I'll need to see some identification," the first guard said, his tone suggesting he didn't believe a word Marcus had spoken. "Where in the world are you watching this unfold? What time is it where you are right now? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone judged you before they knew who you really were?" Marcus reached for his wallet, but his hand found only the soft fabric of his casual travel clothes. In his exhaustion, he'd left his briefcase and identification in the hotel room back in Tokyo. His phone was dead, the battery drained from the long flight. "I don't have my wallet with me," Marcus admitted, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "But I can tell you anything you need to know about this property. The alarm code is 4729, Emma's birthday. The housekeeper is Mrs. Rodriguez, and she has a key to the wine cellar that I gave her last Christmas." The second guard stepped closer, his hand resting on the radio clipped to his belt. "Derek, this guy's trying to run some kind of con," he muttered to his partner. "Knows too much to be random." Derek Walsh, the head of security, crossed his arms over his chest. His military bearing was evident in every rigid line of his posture. "Listen, buddy, I don't know where you got that information, but we've had 3 attempted break-ins in this neighborhood this month. Rich guys like Mr. Chen are prime targets." Marcus felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach, the same sensation he'd experienced years ago when landlords had looked at his worn clothes and empty bank account with suspicion. "But I am Marcus Chen," he said quietly, his voice carrying a patience born from years of fighting similar battles. "Sure you are," Derek scoffed. "And I'm the president. Look at yourself, man. You're wearing jeans with holes in them and a jacket that's seen better days. You think the owner of this mansion dresses like he shops at thrift stores?" The driver of Marcus's sedan shifted uncomfortably, glancing in the rearview mirror. He'd picked up his passenger from a 5-star hotel, but even he seemed uncertain now, influenced by the guard's unwavering conviction. "Step out of the vehicle, sir," Derek commanded. "We need to search you for weapons and call this in. Mr. Chen is out of the country on business, and he's not expected back until next week." Marcus slowly opened the car door, his movements deliberate and calm despite the humiliation burning in his chest. As he stood beside the sedan, the weight of déjà vu pressed down on him like a heavy blanket. The skeptical stares, the assumptions about his worth based on his appearance, the casual dismissal of his dignity, it all felt achingly familiar. His mind drifted back 15 years to a cold December night when he'd sat in this very spot, but outside a chain-link fence instead of ornate iron gates. Emma had been just 8 months old then, sleeping fitfully in her car seat while Marcus tried to figure out where they'd spend the night. His beat-up Honda Civic had become their temporary home after he'd lost his apartment, the victim of a startup that had collapsed and taken his savings with it. He remembered the security guard from that night too, a different man but with the same suspicious eyes. Marcus had been holding Emma, bouncing her gently to keep her from crying, when he'd approached the guard shack of a 24-hour diner. All he'd wanted was to use their restroom to change her diaper and maybe get some free crackers from the salad bar. The guard had looked at his rumpled clothes, his day-old stubble, and the baby in his arms with obvious distrust. "You can't loiter here," the man had said. "This isn't a homeless shelter." Marcus had tried to explain that he just needed 5 minutes, that his daughter needed a clean diaper, but the guard had threatened to call the police. So Marcus had driven to a gas station instead, changing Emma on the hood of his car in the freezing night air while she cried from the cold. That memory had fueled him through countless 18-hour days of coding, through the rejection letters and failed pitches, through the nights when he'd survived on vending machine coffee while Emma slept in a portable crib beside his desk. He could still taste the stale donuts from the all-night diner where he'd spent months perfecting his software, Emma sleeping against his chest while he typed with one hand. The waitresses had taken pity on them, bringing extra packets of crackers and refilling his coffee cup without charge. They'd seen past his wrinkled shirts and the dark circles under his eyes to recognize a father fighting for his child's future. The breakthrough had come on a Tuesday morning when Emma was 2 years old. She'd been playing with plastic blocks on the diner floor while Marcus debugged his security software for the 100th time. A businessman at the next table had overheard him on a phone call with a potential client and struck up a conversation. That man, Stephen Park, had become his first real investor after seeing the elegant code that Marcus had written. Not because of Marcus's appearance, he'd still been wearing the same 3 shirts in rotation, but because he'd recognized genius wrapped in humble circumstances. The first contract had been for $50,000, more money than Marcus had ever seen at once. He'd cried in the bank parking lot while Emma napped in her car seat, finally able to put down a deposit on a real apartment with a crib for his daughter and a desk where he could work. But success hadn't come overnight. For years, he'd continued to face the same skeptical looks whenever he walked into boardrooms or networking events. Venture capitalists would glance at his off-the-rack suits and assume he was someone's assistant. Potential clients would ask to speak to the real decision-maker, unable to believe that this quiet, casually dressed man had built revolutionary software. Each dismissal had stung, but each had also strengthened his resolve. He'd learned to let his work speak louder than his wardrobe, to prove his worth through results rather than appearances. The sharp crackle of Derek's radio snapped Marcus back to the present moment. The security chief was speaking in clipped, professional tones to someone on the other end, describing a suspicious individual attempting to gain access to the Chen residence. Marcus watched his own home through the iron bars of the gate, feeling like a prisoner looking at freedom. "Sir, I need you to place your hands on the vehicle and spread your legs," Derek commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "We're going to conduct a search while we wait for backup." Marcus complied slowly, the cold metal of the sedan pressing against his palms. A small crowd had begun to gather along the sidewalk, neighbors walking their dogs, joggers pausing mid-stride, curious onlookers drawn by the commotion. He recognized Mrs. Patterson from 2 houses down, her Yorkshire Terrier yapping at the end of its leash as she strained to see what was happening. The irony wasn't lost on him. These were the same neighbors who'd invited him to charity galas, who'd praised his generous donations to local schools, who'd asked for his advice on their own business ventures. Now they watched him being treated like a common criminal, and not one stepped forward to vouch for his identity. What seems to be the problem here? What would you do if you found yourself in Marcus's situation right now? Share your thoughts with our global community as this story unfolds. Derek's partner began patting down Marcus's jacket while Derek himself radioed for police assistance. "They're sending a unit," Derek announced with satisfaction. "Should be here in about 10 minutes. We'll let the cops sort this out." The sedan driver shifted nervously, clearly uncomfortable with how the situation had escalated. "Maybe I should call the number Mr. Chen gave me," he suggested hesitantly. "Just to verify." Derek shot him a withering look. "You think this guy's story is legit? Look at him. As the minutes ticked by, Marcus's mind wandered again to another pivotal moment from his past. It had been Emma's 5th birthday, and he'd finally saved enough money to throw her a Real party at Chuck E. Cheese. She'd worn a bright pink dress that he'd bought on clearance, her face glowing with excitement as she ran between the arcade games. He remembered standing at the prize counter, watching her deliberate between a stuffed unicorn and a plastic tea set, when another parent had approached him. The woman had looked at his simple button-down shirt and khaki pants, his best outfit at the time, and assumed he was the janitor. "Excuse me," she'd said with barely concealed disdain, "my son spilled juice on table 12. Could you clean that up?" Marcus had politely explained that he was there for his daughter's party, pointing to Emma who was now jumping up and down with the unicorn clutched in her arms. The woman's face had flushed red with embarrassment, but the damage was done. Other parents had stared, whispering among themselves about the man who clearly didn't belong in their social circle. That night, Emma had asked him why the other kids' parents seemed different, why they drove fancier cars and wore shinier clothes. Marcus had knelt down to her level, looking into her curious brown eyes, and made her a promise that had shaped every decision since. "Someday, princess, we're going to live in a house so beautiful that people will know you're special just by looking at it. And you'll never have to be embarrassed of your daddy again." Emma had hugged him tight and whispered back, "I'm never embarrassed of you, Daddy. You're the best daddy in the whole world." That promise had driven him to work even harder, to take bigger risks, to push through the exhaustion and doubt. Every late night of coding, every rejected proposal, every condescending look from potential investors, it had all been fuel for the fire of his determination to give Emma the life she deserved. The sound of tires on gravel interrupted his reverie. A familiar silver Honda pulled up to the gate, and Marcus felt a surge of relief as he recognized Mrs. Rodriguez behind the wheel. The 60-year-old housekeeper had been with his family for 3 years, ever since Emma had started boarding school. She'd become like a grandmother to his daughter and a trusted confidant to Marcus himself. Mrs. Rodriguez stepped out of her car, her arms full of grocery bags, and her face immediately creased with concern when she saw Marcus standing with his hands against the sedan. "Mr. Marcus, what is happening here?" she called out in her accented English, hurrying toward the gate. Derek stepped between them, his hand raised authoritatively. "Ma'am, please step back. We're dealing with a security situation here." Mrs. Rodriguez looked from Derek to Marcus, her confusion evident. "Security situation? This is Mr. Marcus Chen. He owns this house. I work for him." Derek's expression remained skeptical. "Look, lady, I appreciate that you're trying to help, but this guy's been feeding you a line. Criminals are good at fooling people, especially trusting folks like yourself. He's probably been casing this place for weeks, gathering information from you and other staff members." The housekeeper's eyes flashed with indignation. "You are calling me foolish? I have worked for this family for 3 years. I know Mr. Marcus better than you know your own reflection. He is the kindest, most generous man I have ever known." She turned to Marcus, her voice softening with motherly concern. "Mr. Marcus, why are you letting them treat you this way? Tell them who you are." Marcus met her eyes, seeing the pain and confusion there. The police sirens were growing louder now, approaching from the distance. He could end this humiliation with a single phone call to his assistant, but something held him back. 2 police cruisers rounded the corner, their red and blue lights painting the evening sky in urgent colors. Marcus watched as 4 officers emerged from their vehicles, their expressions professional but wary. The lead officer, a woman in her 40s with graying hair, approached Derek with the confidence of someone accustomed to taking control of chaotic situations. "What do we have here?" she asked, her eyes scanning the scene with practiced efficiency. Derek straightened, clearly pleased to have official backup. "Officers, we have a suspicious individual attempting to gain unauthorized access to this residence. Claims to be the homeowner, but he has no identification and his story doesn't add up. The real owner is supposed to be out of the country." The officer turned her attention to Marcus, studying his casual clothes and tired face. "Sir, can you state your name and explain what you're doing here?" "Marcus Chen," he replied calmly, his voice steady despite the surreal nature of the situation. "I live here. I've just returned from a business trip to Tokyo, and my security team appears to have been replaced while I was away." The officer made notes on a small pad. "Can you provide any proof of residence? Identification, keys, anything that would verify your claim?" "As I explained to your security team," Marcus said, gesturing toward Derek, "I left my wallet at my hotel. But I can provide details about this property that only the owner would know. The master bedroom has a hidden safe behind a painting of Emma's first piano recital. The kitchen has custom Italian marble that I had imported specifically because Emma loved the way it sparkled in the morning sunlight." Derek scoffed loudly. He could have learned those details from any number of sources. "Burglars do their homework these days, officer. They study their targets, learn personal information, sometimes even infiltrate the staff to gather intelligence." Mrs. Rodriguez stepped forward again, her voice rising with frustration. "This is ridiculous. I am telling you, this is Mr. Marcus Chen." The police officer held up her hand diplomatically. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but we need to verify identities through proper channels. Do you have a phone number for Mr. Chen's assistant or business manager?" Before Mrs. Rodriguez could respond, another vehicle pulled up with urgent speed. A sleek black BMW screeched to a halt, and James Mitchell burst out, his usually pristine suit wrinkled from rushing. Marcus's assistant had been with him for 8 years, ever since the company had grown large enough to need dedicated administrative support. "Marcus!" James called out, his voice filled with shock and disbelief. "What the hell is going on here?" Derek's confident expression began to crack as he watched James's reaction. The assistant's face showed genuine distress and recognition, not the confusion of someone meeting a stranger. James pushed past the police officers with the urgency of someone whose world had just tilted off its axis. "Sir, are you injured? Are you all right?" James asked, his hands hovering protectively near Marcus as if ready to shield him from further harm. The lead police officer studied James carefully. "And you are?" "James Mitchell, executive assistant to Marcus Chen, CEO of Chen Technologies. This is my boss, and apparently, your security team has lost their minds." Derek's face flushed red, but his military training kept him from backing down completely. "Look, anyone can claim to be an assistant. This could all be part of an elaborate con game." James pulled out his phone with sharp, angry movements. "Should I call the mayor? Or would you prefer I contact the police chief directly? Marcus donated $500,000 to the new community center last year. I'm sure Chief Rodriguez would be very interested to hear how his officers are treating one of the city's most respected citizens." The police officer's demeanor shifted noticeably at the mention of specific names and donation amounts. Marcus finally stepped away from the sedan, his patience having reached its natural end. The quiet dignity he'd maintained throughout the ordeal now transformed into something more commanding, though his voice remained soft and measured. He looked directly at Derek, his eyes holding depths of experience that the security chief was only beginning to comprehend. "Derek Walsh," Marcus said, his tone conversational but precise. "Former Army sergeant, discharged 3 years ago. 2 tours in Afghanistan, commendable service record, but struggled with civilian employment due to what your file described as difficulty adapting to non-military authority structures." Derek's face went pale, his confident posture wavering for the first time since the confrontation began. "You were hired by Premier Security Solutions last Tuesday," Marcus continued, "while I was in Tokyo finalizing a partnership deal that will bring 400 new jobs to this community. Your employment background check noted a tendency toward rigid thinking and an over-reliance on visual assessments rather than comprehensive analysis." The gathered crowd of neighbors had grown larger, drawn by the police lights and the unfolding drama. Marcus could see recognition dawning on several faces as his authoritative bearing became impossible to ignore. "James," Marcus said without turning away from Derek, please call Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Goldstein from down the street. Ask them to confirm my identity for these officers. Also, contact Premier Security and inform them that their services are no longer required at this residence." "How do you know all this?" Derek stammered, his military bearing crumbling under the weight of Marcus's calm authority. "Because I read every employment file for every person who works on my property," Marcus replied simply. "Because I believe in knowing who I trust with my family's safety. Because unlike some people, I don't judge others by their appearance or make assumptions about their worth based on superficial observations." The police officer stepped forward, her earlier skepticism completely dissolved. "Mr. Chen, I apologize for this misunderstanding." Marcus raised his hand gently, his attention still focused on Derek, whose face had gone from red to ashen. The security chief's rigid military posture had collapsed into something smaller, more vulnerable. Marcus felt no satisfaction in the man's humiliation, only a deep weariness at how familiar this scenario had become. "Derek," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of experience rather than anger, "I want you to understand something. 15 years ago, I was homeless. I slept in my car with my infant daughter, changed her diapers in gas station parking lots, and coded software on borrowed laptops in all-night diners. People looked at me the same way you looked at me tonight." The gathered crowd had grown silent, neighbors and police officers alike drawn into the gravity of Marcus's words. Mrs. Rodriguez wiped tears from her eyes, having heard pieces of this story over the years but never the full scope of her employer's journey. "You saw torn jeans and a wrinkled jacket," Marcus continued, "and you decided I was a threat. You never asked yourself why a potential burglar would arrive in a hired sedan, or why he would know intimate details about the property, or why the housekeeper would vouch for him so passionately." Derek's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Sir, I was just doing my job. Protecting the property." "No," Marcus replied firmly but without cruelty. "You were protecting your assumptions. There's a difference. True security comes from seeing people clearly, not from prejudging them based on their appearance." He turned to address the police officers and the growing crowd of neighbors. "This man made an honest mistake based on flawed thinking. But I've made similar mistakes in my life, and I was given second chances by people who saw past my circumstances to my potential." James stepped closer to Marcus, his protective instinct still on high alert. "Marcus, what do you want me to do about Premier Security?" Marcus looked back at Derek, whose military bearing had completely crumbled. The man stood with shoulders slumped, the weight of his error clearly devastating to someone who prided himself on precision and judgment. "Call Premier Security," Marcus said to James, his decision made. "Tell them that Derek Walsh will be staying on, but under new management. I'm hiring him directly, and he'll be working with a reformed security protocol that emphasizes human dignity alongside protection." Derek's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Sir, after what I did, you're offering me a job?" "You made a mistake based on prejudice, not malice," Marcus replied. "The question is whether you're willing to learn from it. My daughter comes home in 2 weeks, and she needs to see that people can change, that grace exists in the world." 3 months later, Marcus stood at his kitchen window watching Emma play in the garden with Mrs. Rodriguez's grandchildren. The new security team, led by Derek Walsh, operated with a completely different philosophy. Every guard had been trained not just in protection protocols, but in recognizing the humanity in every person who approached the gates. Derek had become Marcus's most dedicated employee, his military precision now channeled into creating security procedures that balanced safety with respect. He'd also become an unexpected advocate, speaking at community events about the dangers of superficial judgments. The story had made local news, then national headlines. Marcus had used the attention to launch a foundation providing job training and housing assistance for homeless families. Every program emphasized the same principle that had guided his own transformation, that everyone deserves to be seen for their potential, not their circumstances. If this story has touched your heart, let us know where you're listening from around the world. Subscribe to hear more inspiring stories about the power of second chances and the importance of looking beyond appearances. Emma ran up to the window, her face glowing with pride as she pressed her hands against the glass. "Daddy, Derek taught me how to change a tire today. He said every person should know how to take care of themselves and help others too." Marcus smiled, remembering his own words to her years ago about building a beautiful home. He'd succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, but not because of marble countertops or iron gates. He'd built something far more valuable, a place where dignity lived.